Hi there, I'm WBRC First Alert Chief Meteorologist JP Dice. Welcome into Behind the Front, our weekly weather podcast. And with me today is my fellow colleague and meteorologist extraordinaire, heck of a guitar player too, Wes Wyatt.
Hey, JP, so glad to be with you today. Coming off of the Thanksgiving holiday, it's hard to believe that we're already talking about Christmas time already.
I know. We've got, at the Dice residence, we need to go ahead and get things decorated. We've been dragging our feet. We had whatever was going around, this terrible upper respiratory thing. And one of my upcoming podcasts, I'm talking to a medical doctor about what in the world goes on when the weather turns colder. Why do we all get sick? You know, it's cold and flu season.
Right.
You were showing the other night that flu graphic, and, you know,
Yeah.
Alabama's in the widespread category now.
Yeah, we have a graphic someone posted, said, what are you doing sharing flu data? But we actually get that data in our weather system, that CDC data, so we're able to report when there's widespread outbreaks of the flu, and we show that from time to time. I actually battled it earlier in the fall, and I think the ragweed and the pollen levels, it kind of started off there, and with it being so dry. But I know a lot of folks, in fact, I just got back from visiting family during the Thanksgiving holiday, and my father-in-law and my mother-in-law both, they're kind of battling it right now.
Yeah, it's bad stuff, and, you know, we get in these get-togethers, and we just kind of spread it around. My wife had it. My wife had it so bad that she works from home, and when you call in sick when you work from home and can't work, you're pretty sick.
Yeah, you're pretty sick.
I can't get to the chair in the office at the house.
But that's a good thing, you know, be at home and get well, and then go back to work.
Yeah, my only thing is I got this, you know, and I apologize every now and then on TV. I've got this little tickle in my throat, the little nagging cough now that will not go away. But I'm in pretty good shape.
It's kind of tough for us, you know. Sometimes when you're doing
Terrible.
the weather, when I'm battling the bug, and you just feel that cough coming on. You're in the middle of a weather cast. It's like, well, do I stop here? I'm almost there, you know. Just 30 seconds to go.
It's like somebody's got a feather in your throat, and I need to get him on the show one day. Our buddy Skaggs. I saw him in the studio a little bit ago, and I said hello to him, and he didn't say anything back, and he points at his throat. He can't talk.
Okay.
He's got it too.
Oh, wow.
So there you go. So, you know, this is going to turn into a health and wellness podcast, but what we're really talking about is December. And I tell you what, since you've been here, and just going back, we've had some nutty weather in December. I remember one of the first Decembers that you worked here. We actually had snow on Christmas, and it was a lot of snow.
We did. I drove to Tuscaloosa on Christmas Eve. Was going to spend Christmas Eve with my family, and then the next morning I wake up and we've got snow falling. So I drove back to the TV station, sat here. It was me and a master control operator, and we just kind of watched things that morning because it actually turned into quite the little snow event for areas to the east.
This was
and what
2010.
a treat on
Christmas. It was
Christmas.
2010.
Yeah.
December 25th, 2010, and then a few years after that. My gosh, it goes from one extreme to the other. I was coming back from the Huntsville area,
Right.
and that morning this is Christmas Day. A few years later, and we'd had a little bit of severe weather that morning, and then during the afternoon it got really warm, and we're talking 85 degrees for the high temperature. And I look, you know, I'm always keeping up with the weather. My phone goes off, and there's a tornado warning. And I believe it's right there, Tuscaloosa County. And then tornado warning for West Jefferson County. By that point, I'm pretty close to the TV station. I've got my son with me. And I said, hey, we're not going home. I said, we got to go to work. So you're already here. I was not even dressed for TV. I had like an extra suit and tie in the back. I changed clothes, and we were on, and we had a tornado that touched down and messed up about 4 or 5 houses over in West Birmingham.
It did, and that was one of those nights where I remember the warning actually include this TV station where we were, and that was one of those situations where we were like, we need everybody to go downstairs and go to our tornado shelter that we have here at the station, our designated location. And you and I, we were in the studio and watching that thing on the tower camera. And I remember we had the mayor commenting that particular night on what had happened, what had unfolded there in West Jefferson County. And, you know, it goes back to I believe it was the Christmas either before that. We had the bad tornado day where the tornado happened in Mobile.
Yeah.
And I mean, that Christmas time around here is extremely active.
We always talk about, we were joking the other day when we were doing the Christmas schedule. I'm off on Christmas this year. And we're saying, well, maybe I am. Right. The weather tends to turn kind of goofy on Christmas Day here.
It does. And I guess the big word, the big message here is that, yeah, we're all getting into the holiday spirit, and it's time we're thinking about visiting loved ones, visiting family, and decorating, and just all the joy that the holidays bring to us. But this is a time of year, especially for us here in Alabama, where you really have to be on your toes with keeping a watch on this weather because it can change in a hurry. You look back, I'll never forget December 16th, 2000, when we had the tornado in Tuscaloosa, and the Christmas presents out there in the tornado debris. It was just such a sad and just a hit right during the holiday time. It's just something about this time of the year. It's that secondary severe weather season, and I know we often say when it warms up before severe weather, but this is the time of the year when it warms up to 75, 80 degrees during December. That's not right around here.
And I was here the other night until about 2 a.m. watching storms come through. A lot of gusty winds, but we didn't have any warnings or severe thunderstorm warnings or watches or tornado watches here. We had some back in Mississippi, and that brings us something else. What we end up having this time of the year when we get severe weather, limited instability typically, and high shear events. So that's the low Cape, high shear severe weather events, all the very marginal type severe weather, but still keeps us at the station kind of watching things. We get these tornadoes that form, and they form very quickly and sometimes almost unexpectedly. We had I believe you were talking about a tweet from our colleague up in Huntsville at WAFF, Brad Travis, was talking about, do we handle those kind of events differently than some of the other more traditional type severe weather events? Because we get into kind of a rut, I think. Every time we have high shear on a forecast model, we start forecasting tornadoes and talking about tornadoes, and 9 times out of 10, that doesn't happen. Do we need some other classification or something? Because you can always argue a point, there's going to be a possibility of tornadoes when you have high wind shear.
You definitely have it's a different animal this time of the year, no doubt about it. I mean, you have your April outbreaks and these big Oak Grove tornado kind of days.
Sure.
You have the December 16th Tuscaloosa F4 tornado kind of days. But then you have these days where you have a spin up that happens in less than, and I know we don't like to say brief spin up a lot of times because it kind of tends to make a tornado seem as less severe, but you do have these brief lower end EF1, EF0, EF2 type tornadoes that can briefly spin up in the matter of less than a minute, and then they're gone. And
really true. Typically, they don't do very much damage. They don't last very long. The wind speeds are not that high, so a lot of times they end up doing the damage that you would have with maybe sometimes a severe thunderstorm.
Yeah, you think about that, and we've talked about this before. When you're thinking about severe thunderstorm warning, by definition, when you look at the definition of a severe thunderstorm, it has, in the definition, it says it has quarter-size hailstones, it has winds of 58 miles per hour or greater, and many times in the statements you'll see 60-mile-per-hour wind gusts possible with this storm. But also, it's a storm that produces a tornado. So if you look at that, you have storms that are capable of producing. Do you just issue severe thunderstorm warnings?
We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back.
Durante Home Exteriors, winner of the 2018 North Alabama Torch Award for Ethics. Right now, save $3,000 off a new composite deck or $3,500 off sunrooms. It's Durante Home Exteriors, built to last.
In fact, I'll tell you this past week when I was covering some of the storms that moved through, that we didn't have a tornado. We didn't have a severe thunderstorm warning, but we had widespread winds ranging from 40 to 50 miles per hour. Some of these winds, just gradient winds. had a lot of power outages.
Right.
And sometimes you have a lot of power outages just from the winds that are not necessarily associated with a thunderstorm, and it's a lot more impact than what you have with a severe thunderstorm warning or a tornado warning. 40 or 50 mile per hour gradient winds can knock trees down, power lines down, and you end up with a lot of issues. Even if you've got a 30 or 40 mile per hour wind and it knocks a tree down on a house and that destroys the house, that's a bad day for somebody.
It's definitely it's an interesting discussion, and when you have a tornado warning, if you're detecting in these events where we have low instability, high shear kind of setups during the colder season, if you're looking at that and you see an indication of a tornado, I mean, obviously when you say tornado warning, that's going to be taken a lot more serious than severe thunderstorm warning. You know, do we need to do a better job as far as campaigning what that severe thunderstorm warning entails? Because it does have a lot of meaning. It carries a lot of weight, and severe storms can produce a lot of damage. And you're talking about those higher wind events. You know, is there another product that needs to come up or needs to be thought about when you think of, we've had these gravity wave events, and we've had
a bore, or you know, they call them a bore sometimes. Either one can produce some very almost non-forecast high winds over a large area.
I mean, we had the discussion, you remember, after the gravity wave event, we had widespread damage, power outages after that particular event, and that night, you basically just had a high wind product that was issued. You know, how do you handle that? Because that day is going to come again where we have something like that.
And the thing about tornado warnings, whatever we do, and the Weather Service has done a pretty good job about improving this, I think, especially the office here in Birmingham, is you never want the tornado warning to become just noise. There was a time it was almost like every warning that we had, say, a decade ago, seemed to be a tornado warning, to the point that it's like, well, there's just always a tornado warning. Every time there's a storm, there's a tornado warning. And it becomes such noise that people just don't even react or respond to it. So I think we got to be careful with our messaging with a tornado warning.
Right. We certainly do. And the Weather Service, they've done a tremendous job as far as helping to reduce those numbers of where we have warnings and there's no validation after the fact that there was damage. And I've told people many times, I said, when you see the National Weather Service issue a tornado warning, you better be getting to where you need to go. Not to say that beforehand that we didn't say that, but I'm just saying they have really locked this down the past couple of years, especially after April 27th, and they've done a tremendous job at the National Weather Service Birmingham with these warnings. Kevin Laws, John DeBlock, all of our friends down there, they've done a great job. But again, you get into these events during the cold season where you have, and you see this a lot, you will see that there is a marginal risk, they'll call it a marginal severe weather risk, and the tornado threat is non-zero. I mean, you could say that for most of the events in many cases.
Yeah.
I mean, just to kind of cover the grounds. And you know, at some point we have to, if I'm trying to plan, let's say, for example, as we record this, we've got high school playoffs coming up in Auburn at the end of this week. You know, how do we, you know, word things and just finally make a decision on this so we can say, hey, you know, the severe threat is not a concern for you on Friday. It's mostly rain that you're going to be dealing with. You know, trying to get to a point where people want answers.
They do. And I told somebody one time, this was many years ago, if we're out here just giving you 10 different possibilities of what could happen, we're not really doing a great job as a meteorologist. Somebody at home can probably do that. We need to be able to come up with a forecast that here's what we think is going to occur, so somebody can base a plan off that. If all you're doing is presenting 10 different possibilities here or whatever, you haven't really helped them much. It might rain, it might not rain. You might have a tornado, you might not have a tornado. Well, my gosh, how do you plan with that?
Exactly.
You know, certainly the science hopefully has gotten better where we can do a little bit better than give somebody those broad brush type answers.
And that's something we try to do, and what we've really tried to focus on the past few years, because we see that in what we do every day. Social media has taught us a lot. We'll have folks that will ask us, look, I've got a wedding on Saturday, or I've got a birthday party coming up. They want an answer.
Yeah.
And I'm the same way. I want an answer. If I'm planning to go watch a football game this weekend, or I want to go and have a bunch of folks over at the house and have a big cookout on Saturday, you know, I want to know, And I try to come up. I'll make a decision based on that, but
I'll give
you
you a
can't
little
be too wishy
No,
washy.
you can't. And I give you a little insight on some of my forecast. And this is from really a selfish point of view. But I think the viewers benefit from this, especially when it's a weekend type forecast. I can guarantee I've looked at it pretty closely. I mean, I have looked at it with a fine tooth comb because a lot of times I may be planning a trip somewhere, get in the plane and I'm going to go somewhere and I'm looking at this thing to make sure it's flyable weather.
Right,
So, I
right.
mean, I'm looking at it even from an aviation perspective. If and I tell somebody, I'm like, the weather's not going to be that bad. I'm going to be in a plane in it, so it's going to be okay. That I've really, kind of looked at that thing days in advance with not just the surface, but all the way up to, through 30, 40,000 feet just to get a good picture of what's going on with the atmosphere.
Well, you and I, we're about as transparent as
Yeah.
can be. And I know for a fact, you and I, many a times, especially when we have some of these big events that raises so many questions, like if there's a chance of snow or there is a chance that there could be a tropical system or active weather. And I know for a fact, you one time even said, look, I didn't cancel my trip.
That's
you
right.
know, and
I
that's
might
just the
cancel
way,
my trip.
we're just like everybody, we make our plans and we check these things. But again, kind of going full circle here and back to what we were originally talking about with some of these severe weather forecasts and trying to predict the threat of impacts, tornadoes, high winds at some point. We got to look at this thing and say, what's the real threat here?
Yeah, we got to break it down. We do that through some things like on TV. You may see a graphic talking about the bottom line or what we're watching, or some of our weather impact graphics. When you see the little bar graph there, and it's got one column say heavy rain in red, and it's got tornado with one little mark in the green, that means there's a much lower threat of that happening. So we try to really talk about what's the percentage chance of heavy rain happening or gusty winds or tornadoes, so somebody can plan ahead or maybe draw it on the map, the area that would have the worst weather across the 20 something counties that we cover.
And that'd be interesting too, JP. And I know this gets posted behind the front on social media. And for all of our listeners out there, if they would post this in the comments section, just their thoughts on the whole, marginal, slight, moderate, high risk for severe weather. Enhanced risk. Yeah, you see that posted by the Storm Prediction Center. What are your thoughts on that? I know you and I have had a long discussion about this, and I really like your approach to what you do in that you just kind of throw that out the window, and it's just like highlight one area. This is what we're thinking. This, if there is severe weather, this is where it's going to happen, rather than include an area that could be in a marginal risk where 80% chance nothing's going to happen.
That's right. You start throwing 5 different categories when you used to have like 3 categories, and it just makes a lot of confusion. I mean, you ask somebody on the street, hey, do you know the difference between a marginal risk and a slight risk? Marginal and slight sound about the same. I mean, you have to really get into the meteorology and start looking at what they mean by all these categories. And I know when I brought up this argument before with the government, that's who came up with this, the government, they always say, well, these categories were intended for National Weather Service offices to look at, for emergency managers to look at, and not the general public. Well, the fact is the general public has access to everything practically now. So they're getting this and they are just walking around confused and not really knowing what it means. It's almost like, can we color code it green, yellow, and red like a traffic light? Most people kind of get that. So typically I don't show those SPC categories. I know a lot of people in this market on TV, they do. I'll see them. I'll show them on occasion, but it's not the rule. What I will show is a high risk, because I think most people will get a high risk. They're like, okay, high risk, that's bad. Enhanced, marginal, all that. No, I'll just kind of highlight an area and I'll say this is where I'm focusing for probably the worst weather today.
And when you look at those, I mean, even marginal doesn't sound like a heightened risk of severe weather, but marginal, actually, when you look at what this is all about, it's an elevated risk of severe weather, or it wouldn't even be there.
That's right.
So
Like the marginal these days, what seems like is almost the remember the old C text,
right?
Like when a day you wouldn't have really much severe weather, but it wasn't to the slight category, so they just had it said C text, and it's kind of like that.
And then you'll have like the Storm Prediction Center issues the marginal, slight, moderate, enhanced, high risk. You see all those categories, and then you will look at the local offices and it won't match. It may be different. It may not link up. So, you have all these different categories and you have different products through various television stations. So I guess, again, just trying to kind of cut through all the clutter and basically break down in these headlines and in these more simplified graphics, what is the actual
I think that's
threat?
what we really work on, is trying to break it down where it makes sense to people and they can walk away with some information they can use. You just kind of break it down. Because you can get just lost in all the terminology with this. But fantastic discussion today, Wes. Coming up in a later podcast, seriously, I'm talking about health and wellness. We're gonna have an MD on to talk about some of these winter weather sicknesses that we get.
I'll certainly have to listen in on that.
It's free too. We're not going to charge for that. There's no copay or anything. It is free health care right here.
I was about to say, what's a copay on that?
Zero. It's one of the few free things in life. Wes Wyatt, and next time you're on, I'm going to challenge you to bring that Stratocaster in here.
I'm going to have to bring, and actually, I'll just say this, and I'll leave it to, we've got a major surprise, Christmas surprise coming up. Yeah, we've been working on something over the past several months in partnership with the Salvation Army, and we've got some, I'll just say we've got some very talented musicians here at WBRC, and it's been a pleasure to work with them. But
nobody plays the wash tub better than me.
JP can tear, and the spoons, man, you are killer on the spoons.
Anytime they get a musical project around here, there's bonus points in me for not showing up. They don't want me. Don't even say anything. I was involved in this project a little bit that Wes is talking about, and it just reinforced how bad I am.
You did a great job.
I already knew I was bad, and I listened back. I'm like, oh my gosh. Let me just go back to weather and flying planes. I can't do anything else. Anyway, Behind the Front, we'll talk to you next week here. Always a pleasure on our weekly weather podcast. You can subscribe to this show on your favorite podcast app. There's a number of ways to do it. Apple Podcast, you can do it on iTunes, Stitcher, and we'd like you to rate and review the show. That helps us improve. We like to have feedback. We like the good, the bad, and the ugly. Feedback, questions, right here on Behind the Front, you can email us. We have our own email address, behindthefront@wbrc.com. Again, that's behindthefront@wbrc.com. Thanks for joining us.
Durante Home Exteriors, winner of the 2018 North Alabama Torch Award for Ethics. Get great deals during our fall sale at Durante. Buy 2 windows and get 1 free. Or receive a free entry door when you buy 10 or more windows. It's Durante Home Exteriors, built to last.